What's going on, everyone? Hello. Josh here in your ear. Welcome to the Holy Ruckus podcast, your favorite podcast. And I'm joined today by contributors and founder of Where Peter Is, Mike Lewis and Dr. Adam Ramison. I hope I pronounced that right. If not, he's going to correct me right here. And we're going to talk about the recent developments that have hit in executive order of sorts by our Papa Frank, Pope Francis. His Holiness has dropped a bomb on the church, not literally, but it's something that has shooken up some folks, and some people know what's going on. Some people don't. Some people are lost in the sauce. So that's what we're trying to do, is clear some things up. What did the Pope say? What didn't he say? What can we expect? What changes are being done to something that's an old faithful that a lot of people really vibe with, people that I know, Catholics that love the Latin Mass, that now has restrictions as Pope Francis issues an Apostolic Letter kind of putting the clamps on this for the foreseeable future. But let me not talk about it. Let's talk about it with people much smarter than me. If you like what you're seeing, or if you've been with us, or if this is the first time, go ahead, like and subscribe and share. But definitely hit that church bell. Be notified when we drop the latest episodes of the Holy Ruckus podcast. Without further ado, let's drop that intro.
We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
Let's bring the ruckus.
Why were you made? I was made to be happy. The way to be happy is to know truth and to love goodness. In other words, I am made for God.
Pero quiero lío en las dioses. Quiero que se salga afuera.
You are now listening to the Holy Ruckus podcast.
All right. Welcome to the Holy Ruckus podcast. We got some guests in the building, or at least on the stream. Mike Lewis and Dr.
Hello.
Adam. Say hello, guys.
Hello.
Hey, it's Adam Rasmussen.
There we go, Rasmussen. I apologize, Doc. I mean, do you prefer just the doctor? Because you are a doctor. You're well more esteemed than me or Mike.
You can just call me Adam, though. If you call me doctor, I'll sound like a physician.
But you can call me Master because I have a master's degree. So I'm more than happy to go by that name.
I'm not saying that.
And that was a pretty incredible intro, Josh.
Oh,
I
thank
think.
you. You like
Did
that?
your wife put that together for you?
Yes. And that's not an insult. That's a great thing.
No,
Yes,
I know.
Like, I know.
She's really good. Like I want to
I
hire
love
her.
that, Mike. Yeah, no. I know. I'm messing with you, Mike. The way you just came off, it was like, nice outfit. Did your wife dress you? You know? And it's like, yeah, she's our editor, and she knocks it out of the park in terms of our video editing and things like that. So we're so excited that she's married to me, because otherwise, where would we be, Mike? Where would I be without?
We would be like, probably in a bar somewhere talking about all of this and drowning our sorrows in, cheap beer. But no.
There you go. And no alcohol. At least I'm not drinking. I don't know if you guys are
I'm not. Well, I'm having a
Coffee.
delicious tumbler of water.
There
Like,
you
know
go.
how podcasts are always like, what are you drinking? And then they're like, oh, I'm drinking some cocktail from some
Yeah,
other
like-
country that you've never heard of. And it's like, no,
what's in your glass? Like
tap water.
I was earlier drinking so this is a throwback. And maybe shows how young I am. But when the Lord of the Rings movie came out, I remember these like Burger King goblet glasses. Do you know these? Like these goblet glasses that came out. And sorry, baby. I remember getting like all four of them. And so I had some cherry Coke with this goblet glass, and it was awesome. And my kids are here. They just got their haircut, so they want to show me.
Hi, kids.
Oh, honey. That's really short. All right, babies, I gotta go. All right.
She's adorable.
Maybe some water. Hook me up. Ice water. Hook it up. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you're rocking with the best of Holy Ruckus podcast. I got here Adam Rasmussen and Mike Lewis, and we're talking about the latest developments in the church. Slow news day, you think, or what, fellas?
Medium.
Holy cow. It's funny because I woke up in the morning and I actually didn't check Twitter right away. And then I opened up to like a bunch of like DMs and emails. And like the first 3 or 4 of them that I read are like, holy snap, what do you think's going to happen? And like I knew something was big and I didn't know what it was, and I kept going through the messages to see if someone would tell me, and then eventually I got the rundown. But yeah.
So someone was hopping in your DMs, and I was like, okay, Mike's married, so that expression, getting in your DMs, is a little different. But let's go, Adam. How about yourself? For you, where were you when you found out?
My wife told me, I think I had just gotten out of bed probably, and she was like, boom, and it actually reminds me of when the Pope resigned, Pope Benedict. And I think she tried to make me guess for that one. She's like, you won't believe it, and no, I did not guess that the Pope had resigned. But we knew this was coming, so it's like it was just like, oh, okay. But then somehow people still felt shocked, even though we knew it was coming.
Like, honestly, though, I think what happened was more dramatic than anybody anticipated. Like, even the people who were most critical of Pope Francis, I think that they were prepared to like condemn whatever he did. Yeah. But I think most people thought he was going to do something that was going to like delay the hold back the expansion. Like, everyone that's doing it now is okay. You're grandfathered in, but we're not gonna
get you in at that grandfather rate. Well, let's spell it out, Mike. What did Pope Francis just do, and to whom, and why should we care?
Well, so basically what he did was in the year 2007, almost exactly 14 years ago, I think the anniversary was July 9th or something, Pope Benedict put out a document called Summorum Pontificum, which liberalized which granted priests more ability to say the Mass, the Old Latin Mass, the pre-Vatican II Missal, according to the old rite. In the past, they could only do it with permission from their bishop, and the bishop might designate one or two parishes or no parishes in order to accommodate the people who were attached to the old Mass. This was in the lead up to Pope Benedict talking in negotiations with the Society of St. Pius X, which is a group started by an Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre in the 1970s in France that rejected the changes of the Second Vatican Council, including the old Mass. So Pope Benedict was working to get this group reintegrated. Like, there are supposedly about 1 million people that go to Mass around the world through this society, maybe less than that. But they, they have their own chapels, they have their own bishops, they have their own priests. We see their masses maybe as valid, but not licit. And the longer a group stays away from full communion with the Catholic Church, the harder it is to come back together. So Benedict did this partially as a gesture to this group to say, hey, if you guys want to become, you guys want to come into full communion, look, you can have your Mass. Another benefit that he saw was that obviously, there's a lot of abuse in the new Mass, especially, you hear about stuff that went on during the 70s, and, it's like, holy cow. You hear about the notorious clown masses or Halloween masses, or, people bringing in homemade bread or making up their own words to the liturgy. And he thought that if by freeing up the old rite, which it has a lot more regulation and, is calls out more specific stuff that you can't deviate from, he thought that the two rites of the Mass would mutually enrich each other. Well, you fast forward 13 years later, Pope Francis decided to put out a survey to all the bishops of the world to see, well, how is this coming along? How is the Latin Mass playing out in the world, out in the field? And the responses he got back were along the lines of, well, there are a lot of people, that are joining these communities who, have separated themselves from, the mainstream of the church. They criticize the Pope. They don't agree with the Vatican Council. It seems that they're not happy with just having an accommodation. They see it more as a, this is the first step towards completely reversing the Second Vatican Council and bringing back the old Mass, which was never the intention. And obviously, with my work from Where Peter Is, I've been hearing all these, reports from the field, people who go to the Latin Mass or used to go to the Latin Mass regularly, who have seen that their communities have become much more radicalized, don't respect the bishops, don't respect the Pope. Some of them are verging on either saying the Pope is is an anti-Pope or is a heretic, or Benedict is still the real Pope. It became clear that there were some serious issues, and people were getting the sense, and there were rumors that Pope Francis was going to do something about it. The document finally dropped on Friday, and I think people were just jaws dropped at how at what he did. Like, basically, he said he explicitly repealed Summorum Pontificum and the allowances that John Paul had, and basically pushed us all the way back to when Paul VI was Pope. And I think Adam can probably add to the theological and all of that kinds of things. But obviously, for people who are attached to the Old Mass, I mean, this is shocking. I mean, some of the rules, I mean, it's not going away completely, and I think most bishops, for pastoral reasons, will accommodate it. But I think a lot of people were feeling this momentum in the Latin Mass, like it's coming back, it's getting bigger, and they didn't really see it as using it as a transitional phase at all, or to help get Catholics unified before, fully implementing Vatican II. They say it takes 100 years to fully implement a council, so we're a little, and certain aspects of it. I mean, I think in the 70s and 80s, we saw a lot of like really crazy liberal stuff, quote unquote liberal stuff, coming out of, as a result, or in the aftermath. I'm not going to say as a result of, but in the aftermath.
I was born in '88, so I might have missed some of those, but I've seen some pretty crazy liturgy
pictures and. Well, and I mean, like my mom told me about, like all the stuff that went on when she, right after Vatican II at her parish growing up. I mean, some pretty crazy stuff, and people breaking rules, and, a lot of ad-libbing, a lot of like saying we don't need this rule anymore, we don't have this moral belief anymore. I mean, just kind of, I mean, everyone kind of knows that narrative. But then I think in the last 10 or 15 years, it's actually, the pendulum has kind of swung in the other direction, where now it's sort of a reactionary fundamentalist approach to where the more Catholic than the Pope, that concept, to them, it's not a joke. They think they take that, they think they are more Catholic than the Pope.
And that's the hard thing. And that's what I think he lays out a little bit, talks about, he sees the divisions. And if you look at the reactions to the work itself from the crowd that is hit hardest, I mean, some of them, I mean, you can't help but be like, wow, like, you're kind of proving his point, that you think you are more Catholic than the Pope, or you're saying that he's illegitimate, or that that Vatican II wasn't legitimate, and things like that. And we can respectfully have a discourse, but we'll talk about what we thought in terms of, do we think this was a measured attempt, or this was so crazy? But I want to get Adam in here a little bit else, because Mike, you laid out kind of the why, the need to bring this out. Adam, anything that might be of a value that we're kind of missing here in terms of what brought us to this point?
Well, I think Mike certainly covered it really well, so I don't, I'm not going to correct anything he said at all, but I do think it is a somewhat measured approach, in that the Pope could have just absolutely brought the hammer down, right? He could have, by his own authority as the Bishop of Rome, which means he is the supreme legislator of the Roman Rite, he could have just banned it, right? He could have just said, you can't do that. But that would have been a really, really bad thing to do. And he knows that, and that's why he didn't do it. So essentially what we're seeing here is a sunsetting of the so-called Latin Mass. I don't like to call it that, because, of course, the new Reformed Rite that we've had since 1970 for 41 years now is written in Latin. All of those texts are in Latin, and a priest who knows Latin can do it in Latin at any time. So I'll call it the old Tridentine Rite, right, from the Council of Trent. He's not going to do that. So what we're sunsetting it, basically, because there's a ban essentially on priests ordained beginning today. If there's a priest ordained today, he is not permitted to use the Tridentine Rite without explicit authorization from the Vatican, right? But if a priest was ordained yesterday or sooner, then he can, he still needs his bishop's approval, right? So he can't just do it on his own anymore. That's been taken away, but he just needs his bishop's approval. But because they're basically saying, look, we're grandfathering it in with the old priests who already have been around, who are already doing it, or maybe they weren't doing it yet, but they could still sneak in if they want, learn it. They can keep doing it as long as the bishop's okay with it. For the rest of their lives, they could do it. But we're not going to be letting any priests in the future be doing this. And the reason is, and this is what struck me the most, and I was very happy with it because theologically I completely agreed with it. He says outright that the goal in terms of how the bishops are going to implement this, their goal is to restore a uniform, a unitary Roman ritual so that there will only be the Reformed version eventually. It's not a 2-track system anymore. With Benedict, he's saying, we're going to let any priest do it. And the 2 forms, which he called ordinary and extraordinary, ordinary meaning the new one that all Catholics are familiar with, extraordinary for the old one that, to be honest, only about 1% of Catholics have probably ever seen it. They could enrich each other. They could sort of coexist, like a peaceful coexistence side by side. Pope Francis has essentially closed the door on that and said, we really just want one Roman Rite. Now, that may sound radical in some way, but it's just a reversion to the way the Catholic Church was for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before 2007, right? So Benedict actually was doing something new, something innovative, to say we could have 2 expressions of the Roman Rite. He did not say 2 Roman rites. That's impossible. But 2 expressions of it that could mutually coexist. So we kind of had an experiment for the last 14 years of what would it be like if we had these 2. Benedict said we could revisit that if there were problems. Well, guess what? There were problems, and we've revisited it, and we're dropping it.
Just a quick question, Adam, for clarification. I know that prior to Vatican II, there were, and after Trent, there were some older rites that were preserved, like the Ambrosian rite, and I know the Sarum rite, but that had kind of extinguished, was the one in England. But how is that? I mean, is that comparable to the ordinary and extraordinary, or was it a separate rite altogether?
No, that's a separate rite altogether. So the Ambrosian rite is really interesting. So this is also can be called the Milanese rite. So it's Milan. It's the liturgy. I don't know its roots, what century it can be traced back to. I don't know its history. It's not my.
I mean, it's named after St. Ambrose, who was
right,
Bishop of Milan.
Right. So it may go back in some capacity to the 4th century, but that would be the liturgy then of the city of Milan. The Roman rite, that doesn't mean the Western rite or the Italian rite or the Catholic rite, because we have many Catholic rites, but it means the rituals of the city of Rome, which in some forms we can trace back quite a long way. We certainly can't trace it back to the apostles or anything like that, but it does go back a while. And what we actually have, and I feel that many Catholics don't really know this, they're not aware of this, not that they need to be, but the Roman rite was originally the rites of the city of Rome, where the Bishop of Rome is the bishop, right? And if you were living in England or Spain or France or what have you, or even Milan, elsewhere in Italy, you weren't following the Roman rite. You were still a Catholic. The Bishop of Rome was still the successor to St. Peter, obviously, but everywhere had its own rite. And what happened is, in the Middle Ages, in the late 1st millennium, this movement gets started of cities want to imitate the Roman rite, basically. They start adopting the Roman rite. Because of the prestige of the papacy, which is sort of growing in the Middle Ages, more and more they just start copying it and imitating it. And eventually, with the Gregorian reforms around, like, I think it's about the 12th century, we find it sort of becoming the universal and exclusive rite in the Western Church. Not 100% exclusive. There are other rites that sort of persist, but it becomes the dominant 99%. So then where do we get this idea then of it's like the only one we do? Like if you're Catholic, supposedly you do this. Not technically true because there are Eastern Catholics, but okay. It's the Council of Trent, as you said, Mike. So the Council of Trent is the big push to just unify all of the West under the Roman Rite. And so what they do at Trent, which Pope Francis cites this as kind of, he says it gave him comfort because I guess he kind of felt bad to do an action that's sort of suppressing in a way, right? It kind of goes against Pope Francis's general mentality of kind of diversity and tolerance. So he it sounds like he kind of felt bad about it, but he said he consoled himself that the same thing had been done at Trent, is that they suppressed all rites except the Roman Rite, unless the rite could prove with documentary evidence, if they could prove this rite is centuries old, like it goes way back, then they were sort of grandfathered in, okay? But the practical reality is, except for that Ambrosian rite, basically any other rites were destroyed by the Council of Trent, and so we were left with only the Roman Rite. And yes, the Ambrosian rite is still celebrated in Milan. It's not celebrated anywhere else. And
the
and
Dominicans, I think, have a rite too, or don't
well,
they?
I think theirs would just be considered a variation of the Roman Rite. I think.
So Adam, I guess my and then have we all been to a Latin Mass before? Raise your hand.
Yeah.
If you have. Have we all? Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember, I didn't know what I was getting into. I was at Franciscan University, and I remember going to, and it was an extraordinary form, so it wasn't it was a high Mass, and I just remember coming in and then receiving like pamphlets and or like it was more than what I'm used to, because usually in the ordinary it was you just walk in and you know what to do. It's the same as it's always been, right? But I just remember the doors closing behind me and then someone saying, "This Mass is going to be extra long." And I was in college and I was like, "No!" And I tried to get out. I didn't want to make a scene. But what I can say about the extraordinary form, like the Mass, was it was beautiful and it was super reverent and there was peace. I didn't know what I was doing, half the time, but I went with it. It's not something that I would, go to now. I mean, especially now, but like, I don't know, for you guys, was this a Mass that you guys regularly attended yourselves? What was it for you, Adam? Like, was it a one-time thing, one-hit wonder? How about you?
Yeah, it was a one-time thing. I went, I don't remember the year, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I just went to find out. I somehow saw it. I can't remember. I believe they were doing it once a month or something like that. It predated Summorum Pontificum, so it was still being done with that explicit permission from the local bishop, and was still very much kind of an unusual thing, although I think they did do it once a month. And I went, and I certainly had no objection to what goes on at it, which I don't know why anyone would have an objection per se, but I didn't have a profound emotional reaction to it. I know some people who are the sort of people who are very upset today, they speak of kind of having this really strong emotional reaction to the experience. And I mean, I didn't have that, and I actually think most Catholics wouldn't have that. That's not discounting people's experiences, because some people love folk masses where they're playing the guitar and singing these post-Vatican II hymns. And
you don't know anything about that, do you, Josh?
Now, why you have to go and do that now?
First time I ever saw Josh, he had just been hired as youth minister at my parish. Okay. And he comes out after, I think after the communion rite, like after the communion song, Josh with his guitar starts strumming and playing "Here I Am, Lord." That was the first time I ever saw Josh my entire life. So,
there you go.
And I have a good memory.
Memory.
And I mean, I think that's one of the things, like, a lot of traditionalists will say there are two kinds of people who have been to the Latin Mass: people who've been once, and people who go all the time. And a lot of the people who go once, they don't have a huge positive experience. I remember, I've been twice.
Okay.
Both were high masses. Both had very beautiful choirs. And I'm not, and yeah, I'm not going to denigrate anyone's experience. I think one of the things that was interesting, and that is, I can understand why there's an appeal to it. And I know anyone who's watching this who's into the Latin Mass, it's like, three people talking about discovering an alien country, an alien planet or something. But it's, for other people, it's definitely commonplace. It's what they're used to. It's what they love. I find that with the Latin Mass, in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily people coming into the church that have discovered the Latin Mass. A lot of times it is converts, or it's people who, reverts, or people who have started becoming more serious about their religion, reading about the faith more, who, they maybe get tired of the suburban, 10:30 a.m. Mass experience. They discovered the Latin Mass. The complexity to a lot of the prayers in that Mass are much more profound and much more theologically rich. And Paul VI actually was quite clear when he said about the reforms. He's like, yeah, we did simplify the language of the Mass so that it's more comprehensible to people, so that they can, they can understand what's being said and they can respond. There was an intentionality to simplifying the rite of the Mass, and to him, it was worth it. Obviously, John Paul II felt very much the same way. John Paul I felt the same way. I think Benedict had some mixed feelings, but I think coming from that academic, very sophisticated intellectual atmosphere, I think it makes sense that he would have felt more of a loss than a lot of the other than other popes. And in the case of Pope Francis, he's the first pope to have been ordained a priest in the new rite. He was ordained in late 1969, and I was trying to figure out if he was ordained in the old or the new rite, and it was the new one. He might have been the first Jesuit class in South America that was ordained according to the new rite. And I assume he was ordained as a deacon under the old rite, or under the 1965 if there was a temporary ordination rite. But I think, following Francis's papacy closely, he's very, very much formed by the council. And I think he maybe has a little bit less sympathy, not being from Europe, where this traditionalist movement, in Buenos Aires, they have the SSPX, and they tend to be pretty aggressive. Like, I know that.
Tell him, Mike.
Well, I know that. There's a story of that. So Bishop Williamson, who's sort of the rogue anti-Semitic bishop of that used to be in the SSPX, but he was too extreme for them. He was the head of the seminary in Buenos Aires for the SSPX, and I know that. In the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral, where Pope Francis was the archbishop, they would have an interfaith prayer music service with the Jewish community to commemorate the Night of the Long Knives in this cathedral in Buenos Aires. So it's this Jewish people and Christian people, Catholic people getting together and having this solidarity. Well, the SSPX thought it was sacrilegious for Jewish people to be praying in the cathedral. So a bunch of seminarians and faithful from the SSPX would barge in every couple of years, loudly praying the rosary to disrupt this prayer service. And this is the kind of thing that would happen. So this maybe is Pope Francis's background with the traditionalist movement, was seeing this radical, intolerant, frankly, maybe not physically violent, but doing moral violence.
Right. And you outlined that earlier, right? About looking at Pope Francis as like illegitimate, or Vatican II as, not binding, or a fake council and all these things. Is that solely what people are kind of grasping onto? Because there's nothing wrong with the Mass itself, correct? Like it's the Mass. Like there's nothing wrong with the extraordinary form, aside from the fact that it's in another language that maybe a lot of people don't know.
It's not even a matter of the language. Actually, if you want to know the truth, one of the recommendations I would have, and I'm not Pope, I'm not Bishop, I know Washington, D.C. does it now, at St. Matthew's Cathedral is to implement a regular ad orientem Latin Novus Ordo Mass at various locations.
So ad orientem meaning facing.
So ad orientem is facing the the priest facing the altar or the apse or the the tabernacle,
east,
and
right?
with the people behind him facing east. And we have Spanish masses, we have English masses, we have Italian masses, we have Chinese masses. Why not have a Latin mass? We have
youth masses too, Mike.
We can have youth masses.
That's a language. The language of youth.
That's right. We don't have
culture. Yes.
But I mean, St. Matthew's. One of the interesting things is the Archdiocese of Washington has never really had a huge issue with radical traditionalism. Like, I know now there's like an SSPX church in Upper Marlboro or something like that, but for a long time we never had any of those like schismatic movements. And one of the reasons why was because right from the beginning we have had the Latin Novus Ordo in St. Matthew's Cathedral. So people who wanted Latin Mass, it's not the old rite, it's the new rite, but it's done in such a way with the chant and with the old hymns and with
all the trappings of what people love about the extraordinary form. And folks, when he says Novus Ordo, Ordo, he's talking about the ordinary, right? The
regular Mass.
The regular Mass.
Most Catholics wouldn't be able to tell the difference, because if the priest is facing away from them and it's all in Latin and it's chanted, right, they would think that it was the 1962 rite. But that's the thing that I wrote about this for my piece yesterday that is really coming from what Pope Francis wrote, is this is the Latin Mass. You want the Latin Mass? The Reformed Mass is the Latin Mass. The Pope writes that every essential element of the 1,000-year-old plus Roman ritual, which is all of it's written in Latin, all those essential elements were preserved after Vatican II. It is the same thing. The wording of some prayers was changed. Some were simplified, as Mike said. They removed things like the last gospel, where they read the beginning of John chapter 1 at I think only at high masses at the very end. They added another scripture reading. There used to just be the epistle, the psalm, and the gospel. Now we have first reading, psalm, second reading, gospel. So they changed some things, but it's still the Roman rite. So traditionalists, especially of the more radical sort, like to refer to the Tridentine one as the Mass of all ages, which is historically untrue, just factually false,
right?
Because it does not go back to the beginning. They celebrated the liturgy in Greek originally, we actually don't know almost anything about what the liturgy looked like before about the 8th century. I mean, we know a little. An expert could say, well, we know this, we know that, but we don't really know how it all came about.
Well, and a lot of we know what the pieces were, like Justin Martyr wrote about.
And
it looks a lot like what we have now.
The liturgy of the word is always followed by the liturgy of the Eucharist.
The Eucharist. Yep.
So, but my point is, to make a long story short, this is the Roman rite, and that's what the Pope is saying. And tinkering with some of the ways it's done does not essentially change it, and neither does translating it into the vernacular, by the way. But if that's your thing, you like Latin, you like a certain musical style, Gregorian chant.
Like, that's what I wish they would just say.
You can have all that.
Just say that. Just say that you like it like that. You love the lace and you love the music.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's fine. That's totally fine.
I think that the Society of St. Pius X, and I think a lot of the more intellectual traditionalists that we have today, they'll argue that the rite itself is inferior, the new one.
Well, they say it was deformed even to the point of invalidity, which is absurd.
Well, and so, I mean, some of the things so for example, now we have, we have a 3-year cycle of readings for Sundays. We have a 2-year cycle of readings for weekdays. There are all these little pieces that are, these little, and they will come up with an argument for the reason why every single one of these things is wrong. Oh, well, you think more scripture is a good thing. Well, it's bad because, because if we do the same readings every year for, there are other things where we have a lot of optional feasts. Like, it used to be one Roman calendar. And And every year we'd have to celebrate some random Italian saint that really had no impact on, culturally.
Even on a Sunday, in fact.
And Elizabeth Ann Seton or whoever gets completely ignored. It's one of those things where it's like, if you're Mexican, you get your Mexican saint days. If you're French, you get extra, and so the calendars vary by country. Some things are optional. Some things are, they decry a lot of these options. Also, I guess instead of, it used to just be Eucharistic prayer number 1, which is called the Roman canon.
Yeah.
There are theological reasons why they brought in the 3 other prayers.
All of which have ancient or early medieval pedigree. They didn't just make them up. If you hear traditionalists talk about it, they say, "Oh, some free Masonic clerics in the Vatican wrote some new prayers, and if you look carefully, they're heretical." No, all the other 3 are all taken from the early medieval sacramentaries that we have. So they said, instead of the Roman canon, which still has preeminence, you can choose one of these 4. All 4 go back over 1,000 years in the church, maybe not word for word exactly the same, right? But yeah, they really flip out about that one, which I confess I don't get it.
Let's keep it going here. We got some questions here. And again, folks, if you're watching, you're listening, go ahead and give us a question. You have some question for our gentlemen here that they can answer. Let's keep going. So we got Holly K. What do you think will happen next in the U.S.? Do you think there will be a mass exodus to SSPX? That's the big fear, right? Also, what will happen to the
Fraternal Society of St. Peter?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh,
whoever.
I'll start and then I'll send it to Mike. And Mike might even have more thoughts than I do here. I don't know what's going to happen. So the FSSP is supposed to be the guys who left the SSPX to rejoin communion with Rome, right? To not become schismatics. But unfortunately, all reports are that this culture of we are the one true church is alive and well as resistance to Pope Francis is alive and well, sadly, in the FSSP.
It's where Taylor Marshall goes to church. It's where Steve Skoczyk goes to church.
So those masses are clearly licit and all that, but what's going to happen? But it appears the Pope has dodged that for now. He doesn't seem to have directly addressed it because they already have their own sort of personal parishes where they celebrate the Tridentine Rite exclusively. That's why their society exists, essentially, with full papal approval. And although no new personal parishes can be erected for the Old Mass, that's one of the new rules. You can't build a church now just to have the Tridentine Rite.
Right.
It does not demolish or reappropriate the old ones. Maybe a heavy-handed bishop could try to do that, but they would appeal to Rome. The Pope did move their competence. They're now supervised like all religious orders by the same group at the Vatican. Instead of, they kind of had their own special thing going on. That's been taken away. So we don't know what's going to happen to them. He could suppress them and say no new priests can be ordained. I'm kind of doubting he'll do that. I think what's more likely is each newly ordained priest will have to get that individual explicit authorization from Rome. And if he gets that, he can be ordained and thus have the permission to say the Tridentine Rite. But that's an interesting thing to watch.
And Rome will have his name on a piece of paper somewhere in a file.
It's more tightly controlled, right? So depending how the Pope feels about this unfortunate kind of the culture within the FSSP is apparently many of them are anti-Francis, sadly. So we'll see what he does. I don't know. Right. I do not believe there will be a mass exodus to the SSPX, honestly. I think the people who are the most enraged, some of them are already very sympathetic to the SSPX. And no doubt some will go into full schism, basically. We can debate whether technically a layperson is in schism for doing that. Maybe not. But it has a sort of at least quasi-schismatic feel. If you're going to elicit masses on purpose, where the priests refuse to sort of acknowledge the Pope, except in they have a weird theoretical way. They kind of claim that they acknowledge him, they refuse all obedience to him. So it's like,
but how does that work? How does that work?
I don't think it does.
How does that work within the mass though? When we start praying for the world and
They say his
church
name.
and the Pope,
They
do they
say
say
it.
it?
And they use
Yeah,
that
they
as
say
proof.
it.
In the SSPX, they'll say his name, and they're like, "We love the Pope, and we pray for him every day, and we follow all of the valid rules that he puts."
So
But
they
none
don't
are
say like,
valid
and let
the
us
way
pray
they-
for Jorge Bergoglio. Like they don't.
No,
No, they say it's well.
They
There's
say
the
Francis.
Sedevacantists who reject every pope since Pope Pius XII, and that's like the next stop over. Like that's.
But
the,
you can't. If you're an SSPX priest, you'd get kicked out if you were a Sedevacantist, wouldn't you? I think you
Yeah.
would.
Well, and that's how the Society of St. Pius V got started.
Yeah.
We got
It's
another.
like
We got
eight-
another question here. Let's try
Yeah.
this, Mike. Maybe this one's for you. Do other rites in the church have more than one form?
I
Does ours?
think we kind of addressed that. I don't think that
Yeah, I think
this
we
was
did
a
too.
unique thing. I know that some they'll use multiple rites. Like I know there's the Saint James and Saint Basil in the Eastern Church,
Yeah.
but that's more like on this feast day we use the the liturgy of Saint James, and on this one we use I don't think that. But in terms of having two alternative options,
No.
that's pretty novel, I think.
No, but they do have multiple liturgies, as you say. So the liturgy of Saint Chrysostom is like one of the most common, but they have other ones they can do. So they do have a little bit of diversity there of saying like, we actually have multiple ancient rites, or what do you want to call them, books or forms or prayers that we use. And they all exist within the same church, you know? So on that level, yeah, sort of.
Right. So let's go there. Here's a long one here. I know we're cutting it close with our guy Adam here, but before you go out, let's see. This one's a little longer, but let me try.
Bye,
Natalie.
Adam.
No. Stay. No. Hold on.
Oh,
there you go. There you go, Adam. I'll knock myself out. Hey, love the information I'm getting from you guys. Thank you. In my experiences, I love all the variations of the Holy Sacrifice. In my heart, I want to show my love through reverence and respect. So one thing that was always bothering me since I started taking my faith seriously in 2012 was the moment after the Transfiguration and before the sign of peace. I notice how we stand and give peace, and then we pray the Lamb of God prayer, and I don't feel right standing. I would rather kneel. The priest is so. Oh, okay.
Where's the rest of it?
I don't.
I guess it was too long. I don't know exactly what she's referring to because I don't know where Natalie is located. I know
But
in
some dioceses, you like Spokane, where I was from, you do stand.
in
That's-
Cleveland forces you
Yeah.
to. I mean, basically, you have to stand from the sign of peace until the end of
Yeah.
the
You
Eucharist.
don't kneel the second time in a handful of dioceses.
I
Now,
think
that
she's
is legitimate. That's fully approved. It's a local thing. Bishops
Yeah,
can
There's
do.
she's from Maryland. She's from here, from this archdiocese. I think she's saying that just maybe there's
Having
an
the sign of
irreverence
peace
to it.
interrupt right then, or
Yes,
Well, no,
it's like-
but she wants to kneel, right?
right. She wants to stay at that position.
Well, so I know that there was some discussion because I know in the Eastern Rite they have the sign of peace during, like before the offertory or something like that, and I know that Pope Benedict had some liturgists study the question, and the interesting thing is that during it, like they looked in the history of the Roman Rite, like the Roman Rite, and when we say it's one rite that's just been reformed over the past 2,000 years or however long, in Rome, that's where the sign of peace has always been historically. Now, when it was
dating
the
back to
Tridentine-
where? Dating back to as far as
dating
like,
back to like as far as we know, like you know, first millennium. And the thing is, I know that the neo-catechumenal way. Now, I don't know if that type of liturgy. I know that they have.
Yeah, I was gonna say, where do they fall in all this? In the sense
Well, they have an
yeah,
exception. I don't know a lot about them. I just know that they have a liturgical exception where they can have the sign of peace at that earlier point. I know that a lot of the Eastern churches have it at that earlier point. The reason why the Western churches didn't have it was because historically, just like what Pope Francis said, all the elements happen to be in that order. Now, before the new Mass, if you went to a high Mass, you'd see like the priests giving each other a formal, like, you know, two-shoulder, like
there you go.
air kiss
That's how I'm
or
gonna greet you,
whatever.
Mike.
What's that?
I'm gonna greet you like that when I see you tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah, the two, you know, the shoulder, like put my hands around Josh's neck and then do this. No, but that's like the formal sign of peace. And the people, I think, would just stay kneeling, and they wouldn't actually, you know, they would participate in spiritually, but not actually say anything to anybody else, and they'd watch the people in the sanctuary do it. But yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know if
I think she's saying it just seems that we're less
Yeah.
reverent in the ordinary form and we break things up. But it actually makes sense for me in the sense of like we're preparing for communion. Like we are in communion with each other. So let's dap it up and
that is the theology behind it. It's not only that direct me and Jesus, me and God element. It's also we're all in communion as a church together,
right.
Which I think
that's why. And in terms of the gestures and the ad orientem, like theologically, that's really beautiful. The fact that from the extraordinary form tradition, like the Latin Mass, like to be facing east to where Christ, will the second coming and everything else, like the resurrection to the east, like that's something that gets lost. And so everything has its meaning and value. So, but what you're saying, Adam, I think in the future, could we see those things adapted? What's it going to take as you, I know we're reaching our time with you. What's it going to take to see some of the elements that people love to be applied to the ordinary form Mass, the Mass that we go to right now that people are kind of stuck with?
Well, no one knows the future of what reforms we might see. And historically, they've occurred organically over very long periods of time through regional variations. And so traditions can develop, which over time go from informal to formal. And there's actually a rule where if a tradition is a certain number of years old, I forget, it's many decades old, it's like considered automatically licit. Like if a culture has been doing it, we've been doing this for 50 years at Mass, it's automatically considered licit, even if it deviates from the book.
So Josh, only 150 more years of folk masses, of guitar masses, and it'll be licit.
I don't know. When Adam was talking about how people's emotional response to the chant and everything, I was like, how is that any different from people getting all crazy when we're strumming the guitar? Now,
it's not different. It's the same, I think it's good to have different musical styles available. The problem is we start fighting about them, which is so sad. These music wars and liturgy wars. We can have organs, we can have a cappella, we can have guitars, whatever.
But what we can have is synthesizers. Maybe. I kid you not. I'm not going to say where or who, but I was at a Mass with a cardinal at confirmation, and all of a sudden, synth was playing, and like I'm pretty sure Batman's theme song, like not Batman. We're talking like the Christopher Nolan, in D Batman with synthesizers at the confirmation Mass. I kid you not, it was wild.
It depends on the bishop.
Hey, well, this one,
they are the authority in their diocese.
There you go. Protestants have their music wars too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's funny. The fights we're having, they touch on cultural and human issues that are not unique to Catholics. So if you go and look at Protestant churches, they have very similar arguments and fights that we do. For example, in the Episcopal Church, they fight about different revisions of the Book of Common Prayer. And some Episcopal churches only use the old version from before 1970 probably, or whatever year. And, people get stuck in their ways. They have a nostalgia there. They have an emotional preference. Oh, this one's more dignified. But then someone else says, no, this one's more accessible. This one's more comprehensible. People have different priorities, which is why I think that we should just stop saying that our way is superior. People try to say, well, Gregorian chant is like objectively superior to folk music at Mass. That's not true. How would you prove that?
I think something that, that we're very cognizant. So both Josh and I know Father Dan very well. And I think one thing that he's tapped into, because Father Dan Leary is very doctrinally conservative, very, very reverent when it comes to the real presence and the Eucharist and the sacraments and all that kind of stuff. But he has a way of understanding what emotionally resonates with people and recognizes how that can spur a conversion. I think a lot of times, a lot of traditionalists, and I'm not saying this is everybody, and I'm not saying this is universal, but they get a little bit stuck on the symbolic of of ad orientem, or of doing this a certain way, or of wearing that, or having this kind of music, or that this is objectively better. But in terms of converting hearts, like I don't know that's really what resonates with most people. I think most people need to feel that emotional, profound connection in their heart first, and sometimes that's spurred by schlocky music.
Right.
Sometimes it's Josh singing "Here I Am, Lord" on his guitar, before the string breaks and he gets really embarrassed and runs out of the
If the
sanctuary.
Lord wants it that way, sure. I mean, it can be there. And I'm not, and again, Adam, you said this earlier, you're not discrediting anybody's emotional, experience to that particular form. But what we're kind of maybe saying is this a big deal? No biggie? Yeah, it's a big deal, but also pump the brakes. Don't leave the church. Don't jump in with the SSPX, right?
Well, and I think the thing is, and this is kind of my concluding thought, is in terms of thinking with the church. I mean, it's all right that we have, people have preferences. Changes are hard for people to accept. Paul VI tried to clamp down really hard, just to have one right, but that resulted in the SSPX kind of leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So John Paul made an incremental allowance, and then Benedict made a big one. But it turned out that wasn't helping bring people back, and it was causing further division. And the thing is, I think
people are afraid of now.
And I think if we look well, and here's the thing, I am sure it was like a nuclear bomb for a lot of people. I mean, the funny thing is, probably 95% of the church doesn't even notice, but like the very online, very active, Catholics see this happening, and it's like a nuclear bomb going off. And I think Pope Francis, because this is what I saw happening, and I didn't know he was going to do anything this dramatic, but it's like, if this continues down this road, it's going to just continue to get bigger and get worse. So I think Pope Francis, may God grant him many years. He's 84 years old. He's just had this health problem, I think, and he's already got so many people against him. The people that he upset by doing this, 85% of them didn't like him in the first place. I mean, I think this was him doing what had to be done, and he's going to take the wrath, the anger. It's all going to be directed at him, and he knew it. He knows it. But I think by doing it now, I mean, I read a column where someone said, like, ripping off the Band-Aid, and really saying, listen, guys, we had this council. We reformed the liturgy. This is where the ultimate goal is. This is where we're headed. He really, I think, took a lot of weight off his successors' shoulders and future popes, because somebody was going to have to do something eventually. Yeah. And I mean, Pope Francis let this go on for 8 years without really, and maybe that was something that people could say, why didn't he rein it in bit by bit rather than just ripping off the Band-Aid all at once. But I think
Adam was saying that it could have been that way. He could have said forbidden and done. Right?
Yeah.
He didn't ban it outright. No, but the restrictions are tough. And I want to know, what does Sunday look like in terms of how Sundays will be? Like, does it have to be the ordinary form?
If it's in a parish church, it needs to be ordinary form from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say
there's no 7:30. So there's this week at another church locally. There's no 7:30.
So I think what I'm thinking. Well, first of all, I know that in DC, Cardinal Gregory said that he's going to study it. So this weekend, I think, tomorrow morning will be the same. In this area, I know for a fact. I know that St. John the Evangelist, old St. John the Evangelist Chapel, has like an 8 a.m. Tridentine Mass, and they've had it for years. That's not a parish church, really. It's just a community. So my guess is that one will continue. Now, I don't know about like Old St. Mary's in Chinatown, or, I mean, I don't know what other parishes, I don't know if St. John Newman still has one or any of those, but they may not be able to do it. Now, what I would recommend as a transitionary thing is to try to do that ad orientem Latin Novus Ordo as best you can.
Why not convert to that? Do a Latin Mass at the same time. We're talking about parishes here,
right?
Yeah. And then if it's not a parish, as long as the bishop's okay with it, they can continue indefinitely. like
Right.
a shrine, a chapel, a basilica.
Because
The
people-
basilica
yeah.
in DC does them sometimes. Well, that's
Right.
not a parish.
Yeah,
So
people-
they
yeah.
can continue to do that if Cardinal Gregory permits it. He has to explicitly permit it now.
Right. I guess my big thing is I do worry that we're like, because what I know is I've seen, like you mentioned, the neo-catechumenal way and them doing masses in their basements and in homes and having their run of these places, but they're out of communion, it seems. Obviously they're not out of communion, but physically, like there's a distancing. There's like, well, we do our liturgy better. Well, and so that's what I fear it could happen, but I know it needed to be ripped off the Band-Aid. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think it already was happening. I think that was pretty clear. But
Right.
Someone like the neo-catechumenal way, the bishop always has the right. I mean, the thing is, the bishop let them into Washington, and I know that they passed some rules to kind of make it like you have to at least have mass once a month with the parish, and different things to incorporate, because there are these little segregated groups.
Right.
That can happen, and that's a risk, when you do anything that's sort of a novel approach to church. But, here comes everybody. That's kind of the terminology. I think the key, really, I think there are different ways people are enriched spiritually. The charismatic renewal, praise and worship, Gregorian chant, sing to the mountains type folk music. I mean, some people just like a quiet mass. Some people like, Latin mass. I think the key is unity. And that was really what was happening in these Latin mass communities, was that they were, there was this real threat of criticism of unity. And I mean, you just look at the different groups that are really openly opposed to the Pope and really openly criticizing the council. And they are coming from these Latin mass communities. The Tridentine mass communities, not necessarily the Latin mass.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
We got a Michael Corsini. Great conversation, guys. Really, thank you. Adam, I know you have to head out. Adam, thanks so much for being with us. And we'll catch you on Where Peter Is, folks. That's Dr. Adam Rasmussen. And then where else can we find you, Adam?
Oh, you'll just find me there. That's where I am.
There you go. See,
Twitter.
My Twitter handle is Chrysologus, @Chrysologus. So you can
Yeah, try spelling that.
Well, he's
the
a
first
saint.
three
You'll
times.
figure it out. The golden tongue, the golden worded, the golden speech saint. Anyway, it was great talking about this with all of you, and yeah, thanks for having me. See you later.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Adam.
Thanks.
All right, Mike.
Mike Corsini, you doing okay?
Yeah, Mike, are you still here? Great conversation. Here we go. Yeah, man. And I guess the big question, and because as we close, folks, why do you feel the need, like, because you started the website where Peter Is, and you've been with us before, haven't you? You've been with us before, once before.
You and Father Pat.
Yeah. And so I really think what you guys are doing is so good, because I think people need, I mean, now correct me if I'm wrong, people probably would accuse you of being like kind of like a Pope Francis apologist. What would you say to that?
Well, it's funny, because I don't think the Pope is perfect, and no Pope is perfect beyond in prudential areas, that every Pope is a sinner. This particular decision of Pope Francis, it was purely prudential. I mean, just like it was with Pope Benedict. Like, I don't criticize Pope Benedict for doing what he did. I think he had the best of intentions. He really wanted to unify the church. Unfortunately, there were just events transpired, and it kind of backfired. And it's funny, because I think people were saying that Pope Francis wanted to wait until Benedict was dead before doing this, or doing something like this. And Benedict, praise God, is still with us. But I kind of wonder how he feels. I think he recognizes to some degree what's happened. And I even if it grieves him, I think it's painful. But I think what we try to do is with Where Peter Is, to get back to your question, is we try to understand where Pope Francis is really coming from. I think early on in his papacy, people framed him because he does kind of use the everyday language that kind of, he's a Jesuit. It kind of leans towards.
He's a pastor. It comes off,
Well, I mean, one of the things,
like a parish priest.
You take a situation where somebody, let's say somebody is, let's say that they're living a lifestyle that isn't compatible with Catholicism, and there are several. You just imagine whatever, and Pope Francis will say, "God loves you." And people will say he has sanctioned that person. He didn't add that, but he must be a liberal. He must think that what this person's doing is okay. But I think he has a sense of people feel that the church doesn't accept them, or people feel that people need to understand Christ first, or that Christ loves them before they're willing to transform their lives. Like, I mean, for example, you've got like a bunch of kids. I got a bunch of kids, Humanae Vitae. Like, is there any reason why you why you have all these kids except for is what your faith teaches? I mean, right. And it's because, because I love God, because I want to do God's will, because I've accepted this church is why I, but people on their own are, most people aren't going to say, okay, well, I just want to have 5 kids, by the time I'm 30, because I feel like it,
Who says
especially
that?
On like a youth minister's salary. So
for sure. No longer youth minister. Yep. Yeah.
I know. I'm saying, but at first you just started popping out these kids as a youth minister, and it's like,
that's correct. And no regrets. Hashtag.
Yeah.
No regrets.
And so I think people have had bad impressions of him. And I think, and I mean, both you and I are kind of spontaneous guys who blurt things out. And frankly, Pope Benedict was not that. He was very careful to dot all of his I's and cross all of his T's when he answered a question. Whereas Pope Francis just sort of like throws out an answer like, oh, well, that sounds great. Right. Or, and I can kind of relate to that to some,
I think most people could, and maybe that's its appeal. But I think when others see that, they're like, wait, you're supposed to be from the chair of Peter. You can't just ad lib things as you go. You have to be, signing things. So I think that's what pisses people off.
The funny thing is, here's my theory. Like since he's the Pope, he has more ability to do that than any of us do. Right.
And I believe in graces that come, and I believe in the graces that are with him and with the chair of Peter, and that the church is never going to fall into ruin, and we're in a good place. I think a lot of non-Catholics really love Pope. I think that's true until he says something Catholic that people don't agree with, right? Yeah. And I think that's where.
But even then, he's built up goodwill, I think, and it's one of those things like when he starts talking about it, people are maybe more willing to listen because they know that his heart is in the right place. I don't know.
Let me real quick. So folks, if you're watching and you're listening, you're just dropping in. We've been talking about the traditional Latin Mass and the recent restrictions put up by Pope Francis in his Apostolic Letter that came out about a day and a half ago. Let me go into the Instagram stuff, what people have been saying as we close. So some people, I asked them, what do you guys think? Are you mad, happy, lost, confused, right? People say TLM, the Latin Mass, is growing. Oversight needed for the Mass now, especially when priests decide to go rogue. Another one of our followers on Instagram at the Holy Ruckus says, don't know what this means, don't know why it matters. Maybe we need a blog post. So I'm going to refer everybody to where Peter is for all these kind of developments, because you guys do it way better than we could. So that's why I love where Peter is. Another one, not surprised by the recent developments. Not surprised. Okay. Someone says, just go to Jesus. Everything else doesn't matter. Another one, her name is Purple, says, sounds unnecessary, but I don't know all the details. Hopefully you can rewind this conversation and get some of those details. Someone says, A. Robbins 2 says, I'm confused. I was too. Here we go. Someone says, I think a cult of some kind has sprung up from this, making it I'm better than you because I'm traditional. You see it loudly today. We're one church, and some have failed to see that. And I think that's what we're kind of harping on. I mean, we've been talking about this on the Holy Ruckus for years, jokingly, but kind of like horrified at the fact that we realized, like, man, I guess I'm not that super Catholic compared to like my traddy friends, and they call them the rad trads. And again, not everybody's like that, and of course, we're not going to paint everybody with that brush, but there is a divide, and folks that are tuned in and
there are people who just prefer the old mass, who are really, they're with the Pope, they're with the church, they don't reject
Right.
Vatican II, and this is painful for them. This is the mass that they go to, and they're sort of like, well, what is this, or why has this happened? And they might even have liked Pope Francis before, and now they don't. Now they're angry at him, and that all makes sense. Sadly, it kind of got to this point for a reason, and it's not their fault. It's the fault of some of the leadership and some of these outspoken voices in this movement. So.
Right. One thing, are you familiar, as we do have to land this plane? Mike, are you familiar with Brian Holdsworth? He's on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit.
Lion's mane kind of thing going on.
Yeah, he's got flowing locks, beautiful hair.
Flowing locks. I like what he said. What I say, but he's definitely hurt by the recent developments. And one of the things he said, I was watching his hour-long live stream a little bit back and forth. I mean, he feels hurt, but he says, this is what he said, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but here comes the quote. I get it, but the attitude is not of someone that recognizes Pope Francis as with it or with this church. He says, how can a pope, right, who barely speaks English, tell someone like me who is in Canada about what's going on in Canada? It seems very. And when I read that or heard him say this, I was like, wow, that's something else. That you're picking on something else with Francis here. But I think what some fear when it comes to the rad trads and the culture that it brings, that the extremists are bringing, is a very like, we don't need other cultures. We just need the roots Catholic, which is like the European, the Roman, and that's just not cutting it for our French community. That's not cutting it for our Latino community. Right. We need to make revisions. It's true. We can always do liturgy better. Right. Of course, as a public work, but to blame, people are, they're already looking for Pope Francis here to lock him up. So there you go. One thing he mentioned is what happened to the Pope Francis. And this is the question for you. Brian Holdsworth said, what happened to the Pope Francis that said, you don't need uniformity for unity. You can have harmony in diversity. Did Pope Francis forget that quote? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think in an ideal world, because I think the reason why he didn't, he even kind of praised Summorum Pontificum, Benedict's rule early in the papacy. I think if there really was unity, I don't think he would have done it. I think he was concerned that, and he wrote a letter that accompanies it that really points out there was real division. There are people who do not accept the council, who think that he's a heretic, who, some of them are even criticized, like Benedict and Paul VI and John Paul II, as heretics and modernists. And that was becoming very widespread. I think another thing, and I think maybe what made it happen now, is the whole COVID denial, anti-masking movement. I mean, the Latin Mass, that was fairly mainstream. I mean, I remember there was a article about a priest in Denver made a YouTube video basically saying, disobey your governor, disobey your bishop, wearing a mask is a sin. And this was an FSSP priest, and I mean, and I've heard about, you read about different Latin Mass communities, and they're like, yeah, my TLM, I don't wear, we don't have to wear masks there. We don't, I mean, it seems to me that was that type of attitude that was, being very defiant against the bishop was also being fostered there. And that may have been the last straw. Right. I mean, I don't know what the last straw was, but I think that may have been a contributing factor, that it's just sort of like, did they respect any church authority at all? Or it seems to me that it's like a give an inch and they'll take a mile kind of situation.
Right. All right, man. Well, we got to pray. Is there anything else we can do? I mean, what do we say to our friends who are parishioners who
I mean,
do
I
attend
think,
TLM, who think the sky is falling? What do we say to them?
I think one of the things is, it's, first of all, it is genuine pain. Like, I mean, we all, fortunately you don't spend as much time on social media as I do, but there's a temptation to dunk on people. And I mean, with all the trolling that I get personally, right, and that, that we get, it's like, part of me wants to be like, haha, but really, no. I mean, this is the Mass. This is the way that they become closer to God, and that needs to be respected. I think encouraging, options where they're available. I think one of the things, like, I really think that the Latin Novus Ordo is a good, midway solution. I know some people will say that that's inadequate, but I think what drew a lot of people towards it was that reverence. If you're a priest, I don't know how many priests watch your show, but I think
quite a few.
I mean, what I would recommend is, trying to provide a little bit for people who, who maybe don't have their Latin Mass community anymore, people in your parish, providing those. I mean, there's still Latin devotions that can be done, maybe adding some Agnus Dei, having your choir do a little bit more traditional stuff.
Fire your praise and worship guy.
No. You just relegate him to, like, Sunday night Mass with the teen group. Is Mike Tenney watching? No. I mean, it really is an unfortunate situation, but I think that it had to come to this. I don't think people are, but it's going to take a while to get over. And I think a lot of people for a lot of people, it's cemented their view that Pope Francis is awful. And I think he knew that. And I think that's why he knew they already thought he was awful. So he did it. He'll take the hit. But I think that it was a wise move in the long run. And hopefully, even though it's going to be ugly, trust me, I think that some things, we don't know what direction they're going to take this in, because this, I think, blindsided them. It's going to be ugly for a while, but I think in the long run, it's a step towards unity in the church.
Right. And I believe that as well. Hang tight for a little break. In World Youth Day in Rio, Pope Francis asked for the church to go out and to evangelize. Well, at the Holy Ruckus, we're trying to do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are on our way out. And thanks so much for joining us in this conversation and being with us. We're so excited to keep it moving here in the summertime. Episodes sometimes are few and far between, but you know what? We love you that much. And for more information on what Mike and Adam are doing, head over to www.wherepeteris.com. Where else, Mike? Where else can they find you and your work?
Well, hopefully you can. Petersfield Hospital is, if you look where podcasts are, go to wherepeteris.com. Everything's there. And hopefully I will have an announcement soon about a new podcast I'm doing, but I can't talk about it yet.
I know.
So anyway,
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been rocking with the best, the Holy Ruckus podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe, share us around a bit, especially this conversation. And for those of you that are like, wait a second, he's not talking about music or movies and pop culture. Yeah, well, you know what? This popped and it's part of our culture. It's part of our Catholic culture and our roots. And it really irked some of our Catholic brethren and brothers and sisters. And so it's something that caused a ruckus. And so naturally, we're going to talk about it. It might have been a little niche, but thanks so much for rocking with us and being with us, because even if you've never attended a Latin mass or an extraordinary form mass or anything like that, it's good to know. It's good to hear where the church is right now and how people are reacting to the church, the Pope, and how he's trying to serve his flock. And it's not without criticism for sure. But again, as this episode is called, Biggie or no Biggie, I'm saying Biggie, not Notorious B.I.G., but I'm saying Biggie. Mike, do you think this was a big deal or no deal?
I think it's a biggie for anybody who follows the church pretty closely, follows church politics at all. If you're a Catholic who stays in your lane, loves God, goes to regular mass on Sunday, it may never affect you, and you may never know that this happened. You may not even know that Latin mass was available anywhere. But
well, there you go.
But yeah, no. This in terms of the Vatican and the hierarchy, this is a big deal.
There it is, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks
I'm
so
sorry,
much for
Big
rocking with
E,
us.
not
Please.
Big E.
Yes, right. This is a biggie. If you want to re-listen to this will be up on Facebook and on YouTube in video format, or of course in our podcast, and you see it right there on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Big news coming out in the coming weeks. A new website is a coming. I keep saying it, but it's a coming. Also, we're going to talk about the new Disney Plus show Loki. We're gonna, which is, as I just finished. So if you haven't seen that, we're gonna talk about the virtues and the vices of the show Loki, and we're gonna talk a little bit about. We're gonna have a Dr. Jesus Berard, a teacher and a doctor, who's gonna talk to us about what's going on in Cuba and how us Catholics need to pray and fast for what's going on in Cuba. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much again. Mike, you've been awesome. I hope to see
Thanks
you
for having me
at a mass that is licit real soon.
Yes. All right. Well, take care. Bye.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much for being with us. And we'll catch you later. Mike, hang on, and we'll see you folks later.